Hi, in this episode of the podcast, I discuss the idea of effective practice. Everybody loves a winner, and we all like to think that people become talented because they're born that way. Sure, there's an element of winning the genetic lottery, but research is showing that peak performance can be earned. Hard work in isolation is not enough. There needs to be more, and science is showing us how. Have a listen, and I hope that you enjoy the podcast. Everybody here knows about the Voice singing competition. They've got the Voice. This is my favorite TV program. Absolutely love it. It's so corny, I know, it's terrible. They have the Voice USA, and they have the Voice UK. And I've watched them both. They happened to be at the time back-to-back reruns. And there was a very interesting dynamic, and just something that I've seen, something that seems to be quite a strong movement at the moment coming out of the UK. In that particular competition, there was the young girl who won. She was very young and very innocent, and had just this most beautiful voice. She really just could sing, and she was so like the true artist temperament, So when she would be so afraid of what the judges would say, and would get emotional, about their feedback, and when they would say nice things, then she would cry. And so she was very like what you'd expect an artist to be, sensitive and all of those kind of things. She won the competition, and obviously with any competition, there's a first place and there's a second place. Now, with the final result, it was so glaring that the MC, when they announced the winners, that she had won, the MC turned her back to the winner completely, and she was completely like in tears and like breaking down and completely overwhelmed. Turned her back on the winner and focused all the attention on the person who came in second, and was like, well done, and second place, and it's so wonderful, and spent all this time with the person who came in second, and then turned around and focused her attention on the person who had won the competition. Very, very glaring decision-making process that had taken place there. In the American Voice, the person who won the competition was the absolute star of the show. They shoot off those streamers, and the tinsel comes down, and it's an absolute celebration of that person and their victory, and their family come onto the stage, and it's a huge thing. And then the second and the third place also are part of that, but in second and third place. Now, there's a very interesting dynamic that takes place here, and there's also a lot of controversy that gets generated around this stuff. Competition. Is it necessary for there to be a winner and a loser? Or should everybody get a participation trophy? Should everybody be treated equally? Like when we play games and when we play sports, everybody, even if you're useless, you get a little trophy and a little award to say, well done for your participation in the game. Let's say we're having a little soccer match or table tennis tournament or something like that. There's no winners and there's no losers. Now, I'm convinced, I know you guys play ping pong here, I'm convinced that you always keep score. But if you take it back, children keep score. Children keep score of games. And there's a huge amount of affirmation in winning. Huge amount of affirmation in winning. To succeed and to excel makes you feel good. To lose makes you feel bad. You feel like an idiot. You feel like a loser because you lost. Right? So they did an experiment in Gambia. And they got one of the villages, and they got all the children in the village together, and they put a big pile of maize under the tree, and they said the first person there can have all of the food. And what all the children did is they all held hands, and they all went together and they shared the maize amongst each other. But then they took the experiment a step further, and they got the two villages to compete against each other for the maize. And of course they raced to see who got the maize. And of course the village who won got the prize. Now, there's also an element here that you're dealing with children. What I haven't found out about this experiment, and what I haven't looked into, the information that I never got, was that what happens when you give the same decision to the adults, who are the breadwinners, who have to provide for their children? Does that dynamic change, or does it stay exactly the same? It's a difficult question to answer. So, we've spoken a little bit this morning about socialism and why I believe that socialism is an impossible situation is because of competition. Life is not fair. It would be nice if it was. It would be nice if everybody always won. Now, if I look at this world, if I look at the globe, and I think to myself, okay, where is a place where there is no competition, where they are sharing everything nicely with each other and everything is working in business, in jobs, because then it's a case of the job. If you have the job, it's fine. I'll find another job. It doesn't work like that, you know. There's an element of survival that takes place. There's an element of reward in excelling and doing well. So it's almost as if it's genetically built into us. If you look at the dynamics in the world, there's just everybody's in competition with everybody else, and the guys that are losing are pissed off that they're losing, and are constantly asking for handouts and constantly asking for help, and are unhappy with the fact that they are not doing as well as everybody else, and that they don't have iPhones and that they don't have televisions and, you know, those kind of things. On the one hand, you have a very kind of leftist approach, which is the socialist approach, and then you have the more right approach, which is based on merit. How much effort you put in is how much you get out. The merit system. So if you study hard, if you work hard, if you go to school, you will receive the benefits of that exertion and the amount of effort and the amount of work that you put in. If you are a runner and you train hard and you work hard and you're diligent about the way that you apply yourself to your sport, you will be rewarded in what it is that you do. There's a center ground as well, because there's extremes. So, you know, communism, Stalinism, Leninism, those kind of things are far left. the very right-wing, conservative, follow the rules, it has to be this way. So the extremes, the middle ground is kind of occupied by the humanists. We're we people, and we would like to help each other out where we can, but we can't always. And ultimately it really does depend on you, how well you are going to survive in this world. And if you don't take responsibility, you are going to pay a price for that. And it would be nice if there was someone always there to bail you out, but it's unrealistic because it doesn't work. So the idea of what I want to talk about, and it's a continuation of what I spoke about, I think it was last Wednesday or Friday, is if you are in this game and you want to succeed at what you do, what is necessary? What do you need to do? How do you begin to approach this problem if you've been losing? Now, it's important to realize that losing is part of the deal. No one can make it through life without losing. And everybody likes a gracious winner, and everybody likes a gracious loser. Where you have what we see on the tennis court with Venus Williams when she's losing and she throws a tantrum and throws her toys out of the cot, and it's ugly. Nobody likes somebody who can't lose graciously. The unfortunate reality is that us as addicts are very, very bad losers. We don't know how to lose. We don't know when we are faced with confrontations and when we are faced with interactions how to admit that we are wrong. Look at our performance. Evaluate where we have gone wrong and try and do it better the next time. What we do is point the finger. It's the system, it's the people, it's that arrogant bastard who thinks that he knows all about my life. Bloody, 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 blah. We're bad losers. Now, with any field, if you want to become a top performer, you are going to need help. It's not just in recovery. Obviously, we're in the treatment center and I'm talking about addiction and I'm talking about recovery, but it's not just in recovery that you need help. With any pursuit that you engage in, it's exactly the same. You need somebody to help you evaluate your performance, to tell you where you're going wrong, somebody that you trust, somebody who you believe, somebody who understands and you can communicate with on a level, to point out the flaws that you need to address, then address them so that you don't have to suffer through the same problem again. So, I mentioned previously about learning how to play tennis. Where you go against the wall, if you approach your recovery in the same way, you hit the ball against the wall, and when you're playing against yourself against the wall, you're brilliant. But as soon as you play against somebody else, you get beaten. But you have a level of competence, and you never get a coach, and you never get somebody to teach you, and you think, if I just play enough tennis, I'm going to make it. All I have to do is be out there on the court, and eventually I'm going to succeed. And there are people who do that. There are people who get through that way. But what's the best, most efficient way to approach this without going down all the wrong avenues and learning all the bad habits and all the bad techniques? Golf is a great example. There's no professional golfer on the tour who doesn't have a coach. There's no professional tennis player on the tour who doesn't have a coach. the list goes on. So I've spoken previously about the book Peak, written by Anders Ericsson. So this is just a little bit more information further down the book that he's looked at in terms of this stuff. And I was so intrigued with going over the material again and reading the material again, and it's given me such a boost. It boosted my motivation so much that I wanted to just, continue and go through it a little bit more, because I believe that there's some more information there that is helpful. It's such a fabulous book. He had taken the first guy who had volunteered for his program to levels of short-term memory that had been previously unattainable. And now he wanted to see if he could find somebody else that could do the exact same thing. And the very next person who volunteered was a lady by the name of Renee Elio. She was just the next person who volunteered. And at the start of the experiment, he told her what Steve Fallon had done. Steve Fallon never had that information. He was the first person to break those short-term memory records. But the doctor told Renee that, listen, this has been done before. So she started. And she wasn't told how Steve had done it. He wanted to see if he gave her the exact same opportunity, the exact same chance to do what Steve had done, if she would be able to do it. And she got up to... Were you here for the first talk that I gave about this? All right, so just a refresher on that is he would repeat numbers at 1 second intervals. And so he would repeat 10 numbers and then stop, and then the person had to repeat the 10 numbers back to him. And the normal capacity for short-term memory is 7 to 8 numbers. Just enough to remember to be able to go write it down, like an address, seven numbers, 7 or 8 numbers. She got up to 20 numbers, 20 digits, in the same amount of time as Steve had got to 20 numbers. Now remember, Steve, I think he went up to 100. Went up to 100 numbers, over 100. It was over 100. She went up to 20 in 50 hours. And then she hit a wall. And for another 50 hours, the professor worked with her, and eventually she dropped out. She flunked out. She could not get past that barrier. So it was exactly the same experiment, him sitting there reading the numbers to her, reading the numbers to Steve, and the way that the individual person tried to memorize the numbers while they were given to them and write them down afterwards. And the most fascinating thing for me around the difference between these two people was the way that they approached the task. The way that Steve approached the task is he would plan beforehand his memory trees and his patterns and his groups and his clusters. He had worked it out beforehand, and when he would get stuck, he would go away and he would think about how he could improve on his technique to add more numbers to his experiment. So he would come in and he would be prepared, and it would be, for him it was a challenge, and he would be very excited when he would break through a new barrier. And what Renee did is she didn't do any planning. She would haphazardly, she would come and also have memory trees and dates and numbers and patterns that she would use to remember the numbers, but she would make them up on the spot. So while she was busy hearing the numbers, she was putting a pattern together in her mind. So it's almost a case of she was using her short-term memory to help improve her short-term memory, using a short, limited amount of memory to improve an already limited amount of memory. Where what Steve was doing is he was doing a shortcut of accessing his long-term memory to make up for the limitations of the short-term memory. So he was thinking about what he was doing, and he was planning what he was doing, and then he was implementing what he was doing, and he was getting constant feedback in how he was doing. There on the spot, he was getting feedback. Something about this particular experiment that I've thought about, and it gets mentioned once or twice in the book. The author doesn't go into a lot of detail, is that what this did was it helped the person with this particular skill. So he developed this particular skill in memorizing numbers. So it would be very much the same as myself if I learn pieces of music. I learn pieces of many different pieces of music, how the music fits together. What it helps me with is it helps me with that particular skill. It helps me to play music. Right? It helps me to memorize the piece. And interestingly, with music, the one added benefit is be able to be more musical and kind of adapt that piece to music that I'm making. But it's a very specific skill. So when people believe that they are these fabulous chess players and that, if I learn how to play chess and strategy and all of that kind of stuff, I'll be able to apply this. And, chess has got such meaning and such significance in the world. You become a good chess player, you become good at playing chess. It doesn't make you good at anything else. It's about the game that you're applying yourself to. So, just to bring it back here to, I like to when I talk about recovery and when I talk about addiction, specifically around spirituality and the application of spirituality, because that's what our program tells us our solution is. So it's kind of focused, dedicated application to finding out and trying to understand and trying to apply, and getting constant feedback as to whether what it is that I'm doing, if it's working or if it isn't working. So it's not like you can apply yourself to, okay, now I'm going to be the best person at writing step 5s that there ever was. Commit myself and dedicate. That's like one small part of the process. Whereas spirituality is much broader, and it's central to the whole thing. You have to do all the other parts, but it's central to the whole thing. Anyway, she flunked out, unfortunately. The third person that he got into the experiment was someone on Steve's running club. Steve was a marathon runner. One of Steve's mates, obviously, Steve had mentioned to him that he was doing this experiment with Anders, obviously breaking world records with this stuff. Obviously, he would have mentioned it to somebody, and a chap by the name of Dario Donatelli. And what they did with Dario was Steve taught him his method of how he remembered numbers, the way that he put it together, his structure. And it worked he had very rapid improvement up until 20 digits. But when he hit 30 digits, Steve's method wasn't working for him anymore. And he came up with his own techniques, started developing his own techniques. And the time frame that we're also talking about here is we're talking about years. What the doctor says is within a few years, he was able to remember 100 digits. So it's not like, I'm going to learn how to do this and in 3 months I'm going to be able to ace this thing. This is something that people dedicate and spend a lot of time working on and perfecting. like learning a musical instrument or like playing chess. And you'll remember from the last discussion that we had, the reason that these things were being measured was because they were measurable, not open to so much subjectivity. So becoming a classically trained musician depends very much on your teachers and your journey. And I was reading through some of the stuff last night. It was so interesting when I read it, and it's so obvious. It's such common sense. Is that the actual practice, not fun. It is not that much fun. Practice is, I know from pieces of music that I've learned. The reason that I don't learn piece of music after piece of music after piece of music after piece of music, and that I can play, 100 different pieces in their entirety without fault, because it's hard work. It's difficult. It's not easy to memorize those patterns and those notes in conjunction when you're talking about a piece that's got 1,000 notes in it and you're learning 15 or 20 notes at a time, and putting the whole thing together and playing it over and over and over again. And it's a drag. There was one piece that I've been working on for long. I've taken a break from it for about 6 months. The amount of notes in the piece are so many that don't fit together or make any sense when you're playing them. It's a random configuration of notes. So I've learned 3/4 of the piece. The last quarter, I don't know what he was doing. It's not musical, but if I want to complete the piece, I have to. It's not fun. Practice is not fun. Back to the exercise. I want to just read something here quickly. Although it is generally possible to improve to a certain degree with focused practice and staying out of the comfort zone, that's not all there is to it. Trying hard is not enough. Pushing yourself to the limits is not enough. There are other equally important aspects to practice and training that are often overlooked. There is a pianist, and I unfortunately cannot remember his name. He's a concert pianist. And he has, to a degree, stopped practicing his pieces before performances. He practices in his mind, and then he plays the piece. So he doesn't. To get the perfection of a classical music piece is, it's quite something. It's obviously at a very high skill level. He'll run through the pieces in his mind. That's how he prepares himself for a performance. So, with any skill, there's the mental approach. There's the physical approach. There's so many ways of approaching this and so many details that need to be looked at to perform well. It's impossible. It takes much longer to do it by yourself. Much, much, much longer. Much more difficult. In looking at how the brain works, there was a person who did some research, a doctor by the name of Maguire, in 2011, who studied 3 groups of people who are studying to be London taxi drivers. You will remember London taxi drivers have to learn an incredible amount of information to get their cabbie license. They have to know the whole of London. And she tested the 3 groups. The ones who had passed, their grey matter had grown. The ones who failed and the control group were pretty much on standard. When she went back and revisited, I think it was 4 years after retirement, all of that grey matter that had grown had disappeared. They had stopped practicing and they had stopped applying their knowledge. And all of that information that they had learned The grey matter wasn't there anymore. There's some interesting records. In 1993, a chap by the name of Charles Revison, in 21 hours and 20 minutes, did 46,001 push-ups. 46,001 push-ups. There was another chap in 2014, Jan Kares. The Guinness Book of World Records changed their criteria, and I think the reason that they changed their criteria is they were tired of watching these guys just go on and on and on for hours doing these kind of exercises. In a 12-hour period, 12 hours, he did 4,654 chin-ups. 4,654 chin-ups. Now, a normal person can do 10, 15. I don't know. There's a chin-up bar out here. You guys go see how many chin-ups you can do. That is a lot of. Those are huge records. So then the question comes in is, have we reached the limits of human endurance and what the body can do? If these guys are putting out this volume of stuff, somebody's looking at and thinking, this guy's going down. I'm going to be the next one who's going to take over the record. The records are always going up. The records are always being broken. We haven't reached the limits of our performance. So if we're talking about something purely physical, like chin-ups and push-ups, what is the impact? What does that mean to us mentally around what it is that we are applying ourselves to? I've seen this information in more than one place where blind people, everybody knows that blind people can read with Braille. And something interesting that they say about these cabbie drivers as well is that sometimes what happens is, because of all the focus on the one area, the different area of the brain doesn't develop as much. So they'll have this huge knowledge. They were talking something about spatial, something like that. I can't pinpoint it directly. But if you look at somebody who has lost their eyesight, what they say is that these guys can use sound to see where they are in a room, which I think is quite a remarkable thing. So the body can also adapt, the brain, the mind can also adapt to overcome challenges and obstacles and rewire and find a different way of doing things. So if a person can't see where they are in a room, but they click and they can hear where they are in a room, why not? They did an experiment with people who need glasses. I think it was people who were at the age of 50 who had started wearing glasses. People who had normal vision who needed reading glasses. And they got these guys for 3 months, and they would come in 3 times a week and do 30 minutes of training. And what the training was is they would put at the end of a room, they would have a grey board with a just perhaps a slightly darker grey spot or a slightly lighter grey spot. So a very, very close contrast. And they would have to identify the markings on the board. 60% improvement in their vision over 3 months, 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week. 60% improvement. And here's the interesting fact. The reason that the eyesight was deteriorating was because their lenses weren't as flexible as they used to be. Their lenses were becoming a little bit like when a tree grows. A sapling is very flexible, but as it grows, it becomes more stiff. The flexibility of their lenses never changed. Their brains adapted to what they were seeing. 60% improvement. None of them needed glasses anymore for reading after these, and they were able to read faster. Purely what's happening in the brain and the way that the brain rewires itself, and what happens in the mind. What Anders Ericsson is saying is he's saying that the reason why we have this capacity for growth and this capacity for change is a thing called homeostasis. Homeostasis is that quest for that warm, comfortable place where there's no stress and there's no chance. So if you're cold and you go get a nice coat on, you go indoors and it's nice and warm, that's what we want. We don't want the challenge of the cold. We don't want the challenge of the heat. We're always looking for that kind of middle ground. And what these exercises are doing is they're taking us into that zone and forcing homeostasis to move. The example being that when runners run, they grow more blood capillaries in their legs towards the heart so that there can be more blood flow when they're running, as a way of bringing that level back to balance. So this is how the process works in our mind. We are constantly searching, so we push ourselves the whole time. Now, I have a personal theory, and the reason why I have this personal theory is I have a little bit of my own personal experience associated with this. Chess players. There was a movie about Garry Kasparov that came out on the Nouveau circuit. It was fascinating. He was as mad as anything, and he was playing against the American Gary Fisher. It was Gary Fisher and Kasparov were playing against each other in this tournament. Kasparov he thought that his chair was bugged, and Fisher kept his pose a little bit more, but he was just as mad. Because what these guys were looking at with the chess, and you will have seen that movie A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe. So remember, this is my theory, huh? When you get into patterns at that level, make you psychotic. Can make you a little bit crazy. Patterns are a scary thing. I've had a little bit of experience with that. In terms of addiction and recovery from addiction, if you're seeing things that aren't there, if you're seeing patterns that aren't there, if you're seeing things in behavior and putting things together, you need to be careful of that stuff. That stuff is psychosis. That's patterns. You've got to be careful of patterns. Now, part of this deliberate practice that I've been speaking about is a thing called mental representations, which is what I spoke about with Scott Fallon and the way that he would prepare for his sessions to remember more numbers, and the way that concert pianist would run the pieces through his mind. Mental representations is a very important factor in improving your performance. So in learning to play pieces of music and what comes together, it comes together in pieces and chunks, and so learning a whole spectrum of scales and how they work together to do something with that. It's learning chunks of information, and this is what they say also about chess, is when the guys look at a chessboard, they see it in blocks of information and not in the way that the pieces move. It's in directions of force and power on a chessboard, things that we don't see. But it's also years and years of practice and study and looking at these things. Mental representations of what you hope to achieve. As a closing example for something about mental representations, if you want to write a book, you need to have an idea of what you want to do and a framework to begin working, and then you build on that framework. The same, it's a different way of looking at writing a letter to somebody or writing a blog post. It's on a much smaller scale. If you want to take it to the next level, it requires much more.